Hello students, now in this video we'll discuss the next part of the unit third, that is laws of motion, and next chapter is that is friction. So in the friction, first of all we have to discuss some important definitions that is used in the friction. So first definition is, what is friction? Friction means the force of friction which opposes the relative motion between the two bodies in contact. So when the two body will be in contact, then when the one body is sliding over the another body, it means there is a relative motion in between these two bodies. So due to the relative motion in between these two bodies in contact, force is acting in opposite direction, that is tangentially to the surface of the contact, that is called friction. So definition is the force of friction which opposes the relative motion between the two bodies in contact, which acts tangentially along the surface of contact, is called friction. So it is the first definition, that is friction. Maybe it is called force of friction. Now next thing is, that is static friction. So static friction means the force of friction which exactly counterbalance the applied force during the stationary state of a body is called static friction. In that case, when there is when a body, suppose it is the body is placed on the surface, so the weight W is acting in the downward direction. Suppose this is the direction of motion of the body, so force is acting, that is force of friction Fs, in the backward direction, and force acting in this direction. So normal reaction act in the upward direction. So in that condition, the force acting on the body is counterbalanced by the static force, and weight of the body, it is counterbalanced by the normal reaction acting on the surface, that is in the upward direction. In that condition, the body is in the rest position, the stationary position, and the force of friction which is acting here, that is known as static friction. So force of friction which acts exactly counterbalance the applied force during the stationary state of the body is called static friction. Now next is, what is limiting force of friction? So limiting force of friction means the maximum value of static friction which comes into play when a body just going to slide, just going to start slide over the surface of another body is called limiting force of friction. Actually, limiting force of friction, that is the maximum value of the static friction. So when the force is increased, when external force is increased, so this Fs will also be increased. So when these forces are counterbalanced to each other, so this is a situation when the body maybe just come to slide over the another body. If slightly force, external force is increased acting on the body, so this is the situation of the limiting force of friction. So in that situation, when the external force is increased, the static force, the static friction will also be increased, and a condition is reached when the external force acting on the body is equal to the static friction increased, a static friction acting on the body in the opposite direction, and when it will be maximum, that is called limiting force of friction. So in that condition we can say that the static friction is a self-adjusting force. Self-adjusting force means when the external force is increased, so it will also be increased in the same proportion, and a condition is reached when both are counterbalanced to each other. So by increasing the external force, because static friction will also be increased in the same proportion, so we can say that static friction is a self-adjusting force. So now next definition is, what is kinetic friction? So in the kinetic friction means the force of friction which comes into play when a body in contact with another body has actual relative motion with respect to the second body is called kinetic friction. So in that condition, the body is having the relative motion, it is actual relative motion when the body is moving on the surface, then we can say that kinetic friction is active. So in that condition, body having some relative motion with respect to the another body. So it is are of two types, means kinetic friction are of two types. Number one, sliding friction. Sliding friction means the force of friction which comes into play when the one body slide over the another body. That is called sliding friction. And next, number two is rolling friction. The force of friction which comes into play when the one body rolls over the other body, that is known as rolling friction. So these are some important definitions here, and after that in the next video we will discuss about the graph for the limiting friction and the applied force on the body and the laws of motion. Okay, I hope that you have to understand these definitions, and next part we will discuss in the next video. Okay, thank you very much.